You ever seen a woman try to handcuff a SWAT trainer with pink fuzzy cuffs while screaming about the Constitution? Because I have. And it started in the middle of a parking lot on a Tuesday. One minute, my wife Vanessa was walking toward the grocery store entrance in jeans and a ball cap, holstered sidearm perfectly legal in our open carry state. The next, this screeching tornado of entitlement, known in our town as Karen, was sprinting at her, flailing a glittery purse and yelling about making a citizen's arrest. She didn't ask questions. She didn't listen. She just lunged, shouting that Vanessa was endangering families, and trying to slap cuffs on her like she was starring in some neighborhood theater version of Law and Order. Vanessa, calm as ever, just turned slightly, caught Karen by the wrist mid-swing, and said 5 words that changed everything. "You don't want this fight." Karen did not back down. Not even when the police rolled up. Not even when Vanessa handed them a card. And definitely not when the officer read it, went pale, and whispered, "Ma'am, she trains our SWAT team." It all started like most of our Tuesdays did: early coffee, errands, and a quick run to the grocery store before it got packed. Vanessa and I had moved into this quiet little suburb 3 years ago. Nice place, low crime, a few too many HOA meetings, but manageable. Vanessa kept a low profile, didn't brag about her job, and barely even carried when off duty. But that morning she strapped on her hip holster out of habit. We'd just returned from a tactical instructor conference, and she hadn't even unpacked her gear yet. We parked in our usual spot, and I stayed in the truck to finish a call while she went in for eggs and coffee creamer. That's when Karen spotted her. Tall, stiff posture, pressed polo shirt tucked into mom jeans so tight you could see the self-righteousness straining through the seams. Karen, the self-appointed neighborhood protection officer of our HOA. The woman who once tried to detain a pizza delivery guy because he had facial hair and looked like a drifter. I watched in disbelief as Karen zeroed in on Vanessa like a hawk locking onto prey. At first I assumed she was going to give her one of her classic unsolicited lectures on recycling bins or proper grass height. But no, Karen's eyes were locked on Vanessa's holstered sidearm like it was a live grenade. She sprinted across the parking lot, arms flapping, screaming about how armed threats weren't welcome in her community. Vanessa turned, confused, and raised her hands slightly, not in surrender, but to show she wasn't a threat. That didn't matter. Karen reached into her purse and pulled out a pair of pink fuzzy handcuffs. "And I swear on everything," she shouted, "you're under citizen's arrest for brandishing a deadly weapon in a school zone." There was no school anywhere near us. By the time I got out of the truck, she'd already tried to clamp the cuffs on Vanessa's wrist. Vanessa sidestepped her like she was dodging a toddler, calmly grabbed Karen's wrist, twisted just enough to disarm her without hurting her, and gently pushed her back with one hand. Karen stumbled, nearly fell, and immediately started shrieking that she'd been assaulted. A small crowd had gathered now. Phones were out. Someone gasped when Karen threatened to sue for assault, and another yelled, "Lady, she didn't touch you." The store manager came outside, took one look at the chaos, and called the police. Vanessa stood still, saying nothing, arms crossed, watching as Karen dramatically dropped to her knees and began reciting the Miranda rights incorrectly to herself like she was filming her own true crime special. When the cops pulled up, one officer stepped out of the cruiser and groaned audibly when he saw who it was. Not Vanessa, Karen. Apparently, she was well known for abusing 911 calls and had a history of trying to perform citizen patrols with a neon vest she'd bought online. Karen immediately began raving to the officers about domestic terrorists and militia infiltration. Vanessa still didn't say a word. She simply reached into her back pocket, pulled out a slim black card, and handed it to the officer. He read it. His expression shifted from annoyed to alarmed in seconds. He motioned for his partner, and they both quietly stepped away to make a call. Karen noticed the change, sensed something was off, and demanded to know what was happening. That's when the cop returned, nodded respectfully to Vanessa, and said, Sorry, ma'am. You're free to go. Karen exploded. What? She screamed. She was open carrying. In public. That's illegal. The officer tried to explain the state's open carry law. Karen wasn't having it. She yelled. You're just covering for her. I know corruption when I see it. I'm reporting you to the mayor. The cop shook his head and said, You can do that. But before you do, maybe look up who trains the SWAT team. Because it's her. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face twisted like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. She stammered something about fake credentials and deep state nonsense, then spun on her heel and stormed off. But she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By the time we got home, Vanessa had already received 3 messages from her fellow instructors. Turns out Karen had already started ranting on the HOA forum, claiming Vanessa had threatened her with a gun, that the police were in on it, and that she was organizing a community safety walk to make sure armed lunatics were kept out of public spaces. That night, Vanessa didn't say much. She just sat at the dining table with a cup of tea and a quiet smile. She knew Karen was going to escalate, and she was ready. The next morning, flyers were posted around the neighborhood. Protect our community, they read. Join the petition to ban open carry in HOA zones. Keep your kids safe. No vigilantes allowed. There was a photo of Vanessa taken from the parking lot incident, zoomed in, grainy, with a red circle drawn around her holster like it was some kind of smoking gun. Karen even added a fake quote, They can't stop us, we're above the law. Vanessa didn't react. She just took out her phone, opened her contacts, and said one sentence I'll never forget. Time to give the SWAT boys a little field trip. That was the beginning of Karen's unraveling. She thought she could paint Vanessa as a rogue gun nut. She had no idea Vanessa had the respect of every tactical unit from here to the state line. She didn't just follow the law, she wrote the curriculum for those who enforce it. And Karen? She was about to find out what happens when you go to war with someone trained to win it quietly. The neighborhood had no idea what was coming. But Vanessa did. She'd been patient, composed, and calm, but now the gloves were coming off. The next morning, Vanessa and I took a walk through the neighborhood just to see if the flyers were still up. Spoiler alert, they were. Every telephone pole, mail station, and even the community dog park bulletin board had one. Some were even laminated, like Karen thought she was organizing the next civil rights movement. She had titled it Karen's Citizens Patrol, as if branding herself was the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday. The best part? She added an RSVP link for an emergency HOA safety meeting, to be held in her driveway. I couldn't believe it. Vanessa just chuckled as we walked past a few neighbors who nodded awkwardly, clearly torn between curiosity and fear. They had no clue how deep they were in it now. Karen's delusions had graduated from personal grudge to public crusade. And like all good crusaders, she needed a stage. So she made one. Literally. By lunchtime, she had hauled out 2 folding tables, draped one in a makeshift American flag tablecloth, and set up a mic stand connected to a karaoke speaker. She wore a windbreaker with Neighborhood Defense Unit ironed on the back in crooked vinyl lettering. About 20 people showed up, half curious, half embarrassed. The other half, yes, she definitely roped in more than a full 100% of the neighborhood's attention, just watched from windows or kept walking like this was some kind of performance art. Karen started yelling into the mic about dangerous escalation, Second Amendment abusers, and rogue vigilantes with military ties. She even tossed in the word paramilitary, like she'd just learned it from a Netflix documentary. Vanessa stood quietly at the end of our driveway, arms folded, sunglasses on, just watching. She didn't interrupt. She didn't heckle. She didn't need to. Karen was digging her own grave and handing out shovels. At one point Karen yelled, "This woman walked into a family grocery store with a deadly weapon. Imagine if she sneezed wrong." Someone near the back whispered, "Isn't she the one who teaches SWAT how not to shoot?" Another neighbor nodded. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. Karen noticed. Her voice got louder, more desperate. She's dangerous. She didn't even get arrested. That means the system is broken. That's when she said it. If the police won't protect us, maybe we need to start our own patrols. That sentence would come back to haunt her. Hard. By evening, a copy of her little speech had already made its way to several police inboxes, one of which belonged to the department's legal advisor, another to the local sheriff who Vanessa had personally trained in advanced threat negotiation. They didn't act right away. They didn't have to. Vanessa was already making her move. While Karen was blowing up next door with conspiracy rants and blurry screenshots of Vanessa at the grocery store, Vanessa submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board, citing harassment, libel, and unlawful attempts at impersonating law enforcement. Karen hadn't just embarrassed herself, she'd named herself commander of a fake security force and threatened to perform patrols. In our state, that toe danced right up to the line of impersonating a peace officer. And that line? Vanessa knew exactly where it was, because she wrote half the legal interpretation guide for it. The next day, the HOA board reluctantly called a meeting, which Karen insisted on hosting at her house again, claiming the community center was compromised. Vanessa showed up, wearing a blazer, no badge, no sidearm, and a folder in hand. I went with her and stood in the back. Karen had a projector this time. She'd made a PowerPoint, titled Protecting Our Streets from Tactical Terror. I nearly lost it when the second slide had a photoshopped image of Vanessa's face next to a flaming tank. Vanessa didn't even blink. She let Karen talk for 15 uninterrupted minutes, while half the board just stared at her like she'd started speaking Morse code with her teeth. Then Vanessa stepped forward, opened her folder, and calmly placed 3 things on the table. First, a printed list of open carry laws. Second, a restraining order request citing 2 counts of physical interference and public harassment. And third, a signed affidavit from the police captain stating that Vanessa was, in fact, not only licensed and compliant, but a decorated law enforcement educator. Karen started to shriek. "You can't silence me. You're just mad I'm exposing you." But this time, no one clapped. No one nodded. One of the board members, a man named Lewis who usually stayed silent, stood and said, "Karen, this is the 4th time this year you've tried to detain someone. Last time it was a UPS driver." Someone else added, "And the time before that it was a teenager with a paintball gun." Karen's face went white, then red, then back to white. She sputtered, "This is all coordinated. I'm the only one protecting this place." Then she stormed off mid-meeting and slammed her own door, leaving everyone standing awkwardly on her lawn. Over the next few days, the situation somehow managed to get even dumber. Karen posted a video online claiming that Vanessa was part of a deep training conspiracy and that she had intel from undisclosed law enforcement insiders. Her proof? A blurry photo of Vanessa training officers in tactical gear, which was literally public information listed on the state training website. Comments started flooding in. Some mocked her. Some believed her. But most people just reposted the video with the caption, "She really tried to arrest a SWAT instructor with fuzzy cuffs." It became a meme overnight. Someone edited it into a rap video. Another person layered her rant over footage of penguins falling down a hill. But the kicker came when someone from the state training facility saw the clip and forwarded it to Vanessa with a note. "Want to borrow the demo team?" That was all the encouragement she needed. Vanessa didn't retaliate with threats or lawsuit. She retaliated with education. Tactical education. She rented the community center under a neutral event title and posted flyers for a neighborhood safety awareness and response seminar, inviting all residents, HOA members, and local law enforcement. Free to attend. Free snacks. A few neighbors laughed nervously. A few RSVP'd. Karen posted that it was a cover operation for a gun rally and warned people not to attend. So of course, more people showed up. The seminar began with a slideshow, ironically, much better designed than Karen's, with detailed explanations about legal carry, de-escalation tactics, and the difference between civilian oversight and dangerous overreach. Then came the video clips. Footage of actual situations where civilian interference caused more harm than help, followed by successful takedowns led by law enforcement properly trained. And near the end, Vanessa gently, without naming anyone, displayed a blurred still of the pink fuzzy cuffs and said, "In some cases, even well-meaning people can put lives in danger by assuming roles they're not trained for. No one wants to become the next viral headline for the wrong reasons." The applause was thunderous. Even people who didn't carry guns came up and shook her hand, thanking her for clarifying things. Karen didn't show up, but her car was parked down the street. We saw her watching from behind a hedge with binoculars. I wanted to laugh, but Vanessa just gave her a little wave. No threat. No gloating. Just pure, composed dominance. By the time we walked home that evening, the tone of the neighborhood had changed. Neighbors smiled at Vanessa. One elderly woman brought over homemade cookies and apologized for believing Karen's stories. Another said his teenage son now wanted to become a police officer. Vanessa didn't brag. She didn't boast. She just thanked them and told them to always ask questions, check the law, and stay safe. And that's when I knew Karen had lost. Not because she got arrested or sued. Not yet. But because her greatest fear had come true. No one was taking her seriously anymore. But Karen wasn't finished. The next morning, we woke up to a security alert from our home cameras. Someone had left a manila envelope at our door. Inside, printed screenshots of Vanessa's photos, crudely annotated in red ink with the words, "We're watching and you've been exposed." Karen had just crossed the line from petty to unstable. And Vanessa? She was about to call in the big guns, literally. Because next week, SWAT training was coming to town. And Vanessa had a very specific location in mind for their live demo. Just across the street from Karen's house. Vanessa didn't raise her voice. She didn't send threats. She didn't even call Karen out directly on the HOA message board. But she didn't need to. What she had in mind would send a message far louder than any internet rant could. After the envelope incident, I expected her to be angry, maybe even shaken. But Vanessa simply set the photos down on our kitchen table, poured herself a glass of orange juice, and said, "Looks like Karen just RSVP'd to my next seminar." Then she made a single phone call. It lasted less than 2 minutes. She said her name, mentioned a training window coming up, and asked if the site across the street from our neighborhood, an unused commercial lot, was still approved for demonstration use. The answer came quickly. "It's yours." 3 days later, the signs went up. SWAT Tactical Training Site. Do not enter. Bright orange cones surrounded the lot, and a portable command trailer rolled in around dawn. By noon, 3 armored vehicles were parked in formation, and half the parking lot was covered in barricades, training dummies, and mock structures. Karen hadn't said a word, publicly. But her windows were suspiciously cracked open all day, and binoculars could be seen propped on her kitchen sill. Meanwhile, our neighbors buzzed with theories. Some thought there had been a bomb threat. Others thought the HOA was getting raided. One guy asked if they were filming a movie. But Vanessa never clarified. She just smiled and kept unpacking the equipment. The next morning at 7 a.m. sharp, it began. The first round of tactical drills kicked off with simulated hostage extraction and riot suppression technique. Every pop of the training rounds echoed through the block. They weren't real bullets, but they were loud enough to make Karen hit the ground behind her hydrangeas. And Vanessa? She was in full instructor gear, commanding the field with a headset and clipboard, calm as ever. Officers jogged, barked orders, cleared corners, and breached mock doorways while Karen ran from window to window like a bird trapped in a house. The best part? Vanessa had arranged for her team to practice defensive shield formations directly across from Karen's driveway. So every time Karen peeked through the curtains, all she saw was a wall of SWAT officers moving with perfect precision, quiet, organized, professional. Not a word was said to her. Not even a glance. It drove her mad. By lunchtime, Karen had completely snapped. She came barreling out of her front door in a sun hat, robe, and mismatched shoes, waving her arms like a malfunctioning windmill and yelling, "This is harassment. I know what this is. You're trying to intimidate me." She had a garden hose in one hand and a phone in the other, screaming at the dispatcher about domestic military intimidation and personal targeting by rogue forces. Vanessa didn't even pause the drill. She simply pointed, and the shield line rotated 90 degrees. Karen, in response, aimed the hose at them and squeezed the trigger. It sprayed maybe 6 feet before dribbling out. One of the officers casually raised his riot shield, deflected the mist, and kept walking. Karen dropped the hose and ran back inside. Later that afternoon, she was seen pacing on her porch with a megaphone, warning neighbors not to drink the tap water because it had been compromised by government agents. No one listened. That evening, a few of the SWAT officers invited Vanessa to join them for coffee at the corner cafe. I tagged along. As we walked in, several patrons stood up and clapped quietly. One even whispered, "That was the coolest thing I've seen all year." Vanessa nodded graciously, but she didn't gloat. She simply ordered her black coffee, sat down, and began reviewing footage from the day's drills. Karen had spent the entire afternoon filming the training from her upstairs window with a shaky camera and then posted the video online with a dramatic title, "Tyranny in the Suburbs, My Community Under Siege." It went viral, but not for the reasons she wanted. Commenters roasted her relentlessly. One wrote, "Lady, they're literally training to protect people like you." Another said, "Imagine living across from John Wick and trying to outcop them with garden tools." The next morning, Karen escalated again. This time, she made fake press badges for herself and 2 of her HOA friends, then marched over to the training site demanding official comment. She claimed she was with Suburban Truth News, a blog she created the night before. Vanessa let her get within 10 feet before calmly raising a hand and saying, "Ma'am, this is a restricted zone. Please return to your property or be cited for trespassing." Karen screamed that she was an investigative journalist and began filming in selfie mode. That's when 2 real reporters, who'd been invited by the police department for a segment on advanced community training, arrived in a marked news van. One looked at Karen and asked, "Are you with the team?" Karen proudly said, "I'm the local safety watchdog." The reporter raised an eyebrow and replied, "I thought you were the one who tried to handcuff a SWAT instructor with toy cuffs." Karen turned beet red and fled before the cameras could roll. Later that week, Vanessa presented her findings and footage to the police department and offered to host monthly community training sessions, real ones, for residents who wanted to learn about proper safety, de-escalation, and citizen rights. The proposal passed immediately. Karen, meanwhile, received an official warning from the city attorney's office for interfering with authorized law enforcement activity and impersonating a member of the press in a restricted zone. Her face when the citation was delivered by a plainclothes officer she once accused of being a rogue delivery guy was priceless. She tried to slam the door, but he slid the notice under the frame before it shut. The SWAT team packed up by the weekend, leaving the lot spotless. Vanessa left behind a small laminated sign at the edge of the sidewalk. It read, "Train smart. Act wiser. Know the law. Simple. Poised. Direct." Karen tore it down within the hour. But the message had already landed. The neighborhood had seen the difference between delusion and discipline, between chaos and control. And for the first time, no one was listening to Karen. Even her loyal safety committee had stopped answering her calls. One member had taken up Tai Chi instead, saying, "I'd rather breathe deeply than run around in panic vests." Just when we thought things might settle, Karen found one more card to play. This time, she went to the county commissioner's office with a formal complaint alleging that Vanessa was staging military-style propaganda and psychologically destabilizing residents through simulated force. The commissioner, who had been trained by Vanessa himself 5 years prior, invited her in for a private meeting. She showed up with a binder, video clips, and what looked like a homemade map of military infiltration zones, half of which were just parks and libraries. He listened patiently, then asked, "And how do you define psychological destabilization?" She couldn't answer. The complaint was dismissed on the spot. As Karen stormed out of the office, she shouted, "I'll take this to the governor." Ironically, the governor's security chief had also trained under Vanessa and later texted her a laughing emoji and the words, "Your fan club grows." Back home, we found another surprise. Karen had put up a massive yard sign that read, "Warning, area under surveillance by private citizens." It had a poorly drawn eye and a made-up badge logo in the corner. But the icing on the cake? She also installed a plastic traffic cone in her driveway with a paper taped to it that said, "Emergency Citizen Checkpoint." We didn't say a word. We just watched her flail around with walkie-talkies, trying to get passing joggers to stop and verify their safe intent. One of the joggers happened to be a police dog handler in plain clothes. When she demanded he identify himself, he just showed her his badge. She screamed and ran back inside. Vanessa, ever the professional, remained composed. But that night, as we sat on the back patio sipping tea, she looked over the rooftops and said, "I give it 2 weeks before she tries to install traffic spikes." I laughed, thinking she was joking. But I should have known better. Karen wasn't just spiraling. She was accelerating. And whatever came next, Vanessa was more than ready for it. Because, unlike Karen, she wasn't pretending to protect anyone. She actually could. The sun had barely risen when the HOA emergency alert thread lit up like a Christmas tree. Residents were sending photos, videos, and long text chains with one central subject. Karen had placed road cones at both ends of the cul-de-sac and was now standing in a reflective vest, blocking traffic, clipboard in hand. She had turned our street into her own personal checkpoint, complete with a whistle and what looked like a barcode scanner she bought online. The sign she posted said, "Community Safety Inspection, all vehicles subject to search." Nobody could figure out if this was a prank, a breakdown, or both. One neighbor tried to drive past her on the way to work, and Karen physically stood in front of his car, demanding he submit his glove compartment for inspection. He politely declined and backed up. Another neighbor wasn't so diplomatic. She rolled down her window and asked if Karen had lost her mind. Karen responded by yelling into her walkie-talkie, "Code Orange! Code Orange!" and scribbling furiously on her clipboard. Within an hour, the HOA board president was knocking on Karen's door, visibly angry. But Karen refused to come outside. Instead, she yelled through the screen that she was acting in accordance with the Emergency Neighborhood Defense Clause in the HOA bylaws, which, for the record, doesn't exist. The board told her to take down the signs and cones immediately or face fines. Karen responded with a printed letter declaring herself interim safety coordinator and claimed she had the authority to override board decisions if there was credible threat data, which apparently, in her world, meant Vanessa walking past her driveway. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat calmly on our front porch with a notepad in her lap, just watching it unfold like a live soap opera. She hadn't said a word to Karen in over a week. She didn't need to. Karen was publicly proving everything Vanessa had been warning about, and the neighborhood had officially reached the point of exhaustion. The real turning point came that evening. The HLA held a town hall meeting at the community center to address the security hysteria that had engulfed the neighborhood. Everyone showed up. Even people who normally avoided meetings came just to see what Karen would do. She didn't disappoint. She arrived wearing a tactical vest over her windbreaker, a body camera strapped to her chest, and 3 color-coded folders labeled Evidence, Witness Testimony, and Future Operations. She stormed to the front and demanded to speak first, citing her urgency of report. The board reluctantly gave her the floor. Karen launched into a 40-minute monologue full of wild claims. She said Vanessa had formed a secret alliance with law enforcement to suppress civilian liberties, that the SWAT drill had been a covert intimidation op, and that several neighbors were collaborating with hostile forces. She even held up grainy photos of people walking their dogs, claiming their leash lengths were coded signals. When she finished, the room was dead silent. Then one voice from the back asked, "What does any of this have to do with banning open carry?" Another said, "Lady, we just want to park our cars without getting scanned." And then came the final nail. Vanessa stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even approach the podium. She simply said, "I'd like to submit my resignation from the HOA Compliance Liaison Committee, effective immediately, as I can no longer take part in a body that tolerates this level of baseless hysteria." The board tried to stop her, but she kept going. "I also have legal documentation proving that Ms. Karen has impersonated law enforcement, created unauthorized checkpoints, and distributed false public safety information under HOA branding." Then she handed the documents to the president, nodded, and left. Karen tried to speak again. But this time, no one was listening. Phones buzzed. People whispered. One woman stood and announced she'd been secretly recording the whole meeting. Another neighbor, a retired judge, asked for a copy of Karen's Emergency Authority Clause to review it for legality. Karen panicked. She grabbed her folders and ran from the room, nearly knocking over a table full of plastic water cup. Her witness testimony folder fell open during her escape, revealing that the contents were just screenshots of next-door comments printed in black and white. People stayed behind long after she left, talking in small groups. One by one, they began to apologize to Vanessa, not just for doubting her, but for not stepping in sooner. Over the next few days, the fallout was swift. The HOA board voted unanimously to suspend Karen's membership pending a full investigation. They issued a public statement condemning her actions, declared her checkpoints unauthorized, and revoked any committee access she had. But it didn't stop there. The legal team Vanessa had consulted quietly submitted a complaint to the county regarding Karen's impersonation of a public officer. That triggered a civil inquiry. Then someone uncovered that Karen had used HOA funds to print her flyers, rent traffic cones, and even order customized reflective vests. When asked where she got the money, she claimed it was a safety emergency discretionary expense. The board was livid. She was now facing a full audit. But the final collapse came from within. One of Karen's closest allies, Pamela, the secretary of her neighborhood safety watch, flipped. She forwarded a long chain of emails between her and Karen where Karen bragged about how she was going to smoke out the gun crowd and humiliate the SWAT queen with a little neighborhood theater. Pamela told the board she didn't sign up for an anti-police witch hunt, and she wanted to distance herself before things got worse. Karen tried to claim the emails were fake, but the timestamps and metadata matched. Within 48 hours, the remaining members of her little club disbanded. Her support had vanished. Karen tried one last act of desperation. She sent out another letter to all residents claiming she had new evidence of Vanessa's corruption, and invited everyone to a public exposure presentation in her driveway. No one showed up. Not one person. She stood there for 15 minutes holding a remote for a projector that wasn't even plugged in. Eventually, she turned around, packed up her folding table, and went inside. From that moment on, she stopped appearing at community events. She took down her signs, removed the cones, and canceled her HOA app account. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. The neighborhood changed after that. People started talking to each other more. A few thanked Vanessa for her restraint, her professionalism, and for showing them how real safety looked. The HOA board invited her back, but she declined, saying she preferred to help from the sidelines if needed. That week, the board voted to create a new rule prohibiting unauthorized patrols, fake checkpoints, and impersonation of any form of authority within the neighborhood. It was unofficially called the Karen Clause. Everyone knew what it meant. Karen may have lost her platform, but that didn't mean she'd lost her obsession. If anything, it had deepened. After weeks of silence, we noticed subtle signs she was still watching. At first, it was harmless enough. A car parked half a block down with tinted windows that would sit for hours before quietly rolling off. Then strange sounds at night. Nothing overt, just odd clicks near our gate, distant rustles by the hedges, and once, a flashlight beam that swept across our backyard just long enough to be noticed. Vanessa clocked it all but didn't react. She noted times, patterns, and directions. She wasn't just aware, she was documenting. She'd dealt with stalkers before, but never a middle-aged HOA queen with a martyr complex and access to Amazon Prime. One afternoon, a neighbor named James came by and awkwardly asked if Vanessa had done something to upset Karen again. Confused, we asked why. He said Karen had dropped off a stack of informational pamphlets about Vanessa, labeling her a disguised operator for a federal infiltration unit. The pamphlets included heavily edited photos from Vanessa's old training sessions, marked with red arrows and text like "Observe the elbow stance," "Military pattern," and "Smile concealment," classic deception tactic. It would have been funny if it weren't so disturbing. James said Karen had even asked him to sign a petition for a civil inquiry into Vanessa's presence in the neighborhood. He refused, of course, but others were too polite to say no, and some just didn't want to get involved. That night, Vanessa made another call. Not to the police. Not to the HOA. She called the state attorney general's office. Not to file a complaint, but to offer a training session. A special seminar titled Civilian Boundary Law and Legal Intervention Limits, to be held at the County Civic Center and open to the public, with emphasis on suburban community conflict. The invite list included law enforcement, HOA reps from 3 counties, and a few people from city council. Karen had no idea she had just inspired a statewide legal policy session. Vanessa wasn't just ending Karen's behavior, she was converting it into an educational tool that would expose the danger of unchecked paranoia. Flyers for the seminar went up the following week. They were clean, professional, and informative. No drama, no targeting. Just one line at the bottom that said, "Presented by Vanessa Rhodes, State Law Enforcement Tactical Advisor." Karen saw them almost immediately. She responded with a printed rant she shoved into mailboxes overnight, warning that Vanessa was attempting to indoctrinate the community with propaganda disguised as education. She even claimed the seminar was a covert recruitment event for shadow enforcement. Her wording was so bizarre that most people dismissed it outright. But a few residents grew concerned and asked Vanessa directly. She didn't try to sway them. She simply invited them to attend and see for themselves. That confidence changed everything. The seminar day arrived, and the Civic Center was full. Uniformed officers, attorneys, and residents from all over the county filled the seat. Vanessa stood at the front, poised, calm, and professional. She began by defining the legal limits of civilian authority, how citizens' arrests are regulated, and where impersonation becomes a criminal offense. Then she pivoted, showing real-life examples, including anonymized footage of the pink fuzzy handcuff incident, edited to protect identities but clear enough that everyone in the room knew what they were watching. There was no mockery, no exaggeration, just facts. She explained the escalation of Karen's behavior, how it aligned with behavioral patterns of delusional authority fixation, and the legal consequences that could have been enforced at multiple stages. Then she added, "But we chose a different route. Because sometimes education has more long-term impact than prosecution." The crowd responded with a standing ovation. Not because it was flashy, but because it was clear, calm, and impossible to ignore. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines read things like, "From conflict to clarity," "SWAT instructor educates HOA communities," and "When civilians overstep, one trainer's mission to restore order." Karen saw the coverage. We know this because the next morning, we found a message spray-painted on the back fence. It wasn't vulgar, but it was telling. 3 words, unevenly scrawled in red paint. I see everything. Vanessa called it in. Police came, took photos, and filed a report. But without direct evidence, they couldn't press charges. Still, the message had been delivered, and Vanessa's patience had officially ended. She didn't retaliate through speeches or seminars. She retaliated through action. Over the next few days, Vanessa began working with a private legal team to file a civil harassment suit. She compiled every shred of evidence, every flyer, every photo, every video clip, the manila envelope, the anonymous packages, the fake checkpoints, the trespassing caught on our backyard cameras. It all went into a massive binder labeled Pattern of Escalation. The moment the suit was filed, Karen was served on her porch in front of 3 neighbors and a mail carrier. She screamed about defamation and claimed it was government retaliation. But the papers didn't accuse her of slander. They accused her of endangerment, targeted harassment, and emotional distress with documented community impact. Karen's court date was set for 30 days later. Until then, she was restricted from contacting Vanessa in any form, could not approach within 200 feet of our property, and was temporarily removed from any official HOA activities by emergency board vote. She tried to appeal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Not just the photos and videos, but testimonies from over a dozen residents who came forward, each with their own stories of Karen's pressure tactics, her fake patrols, her bizarre threats. Even Pamela returned to offer testimony, claiming Karen had become obsessed with control and was now detached from reality. Court day arrived, and Karen showed up looking frazzled and defensive. She brought a binder of her own, filled with wild theories, quotes pulled out of context, and photos that had nothing to do with anything. She tried to represent herself. The judge cut her off 3 times before she even finished her opening argument. Vanessa's lawyer calmly presented the evidence, step by step, with precision. The judge didn't take long. A full restraining order was granted. Karen was found liable for harassment and ordered to pay damages to cover security upgrades and emotional distress, and she was banned from holding any leadership position in a registered HOA for 5 years. Karen's face when the verdict dropped looked like it had forgotten how to be angry, just stunned and sagging, her illusion of power finally shattered by the one thing she could never control: the law. We thought it was over, that maybe Karen would just fade into the background and quietly disappear. But then, late one night, our doorbell rang. Vanessa checked the cameras and saw no one. But on the doorstep sat a small package. Inside was a note that read, "You may have fooled them, but I see you." Taped to it was a torn piece of a flyer from weeks ago. Vanessa read it, crumpled it up, and said, "She's not done. Not yet." And just like that, the quiet wasn't so quiet anymore. Karen had lost the neighborhood, the board, her allies, but her paranoia wasn't finished. And Vanessa, knowing what might come next, began preparing for the final chapter. Because sometimes the biggest explosions come after the smoke has cleared. The weeks that followed, Karen kept to herself. No flyers, no checkpoints, no late-night lurking. Her house went dark by 8 p.m. every night. Her blinds stayed shut. One day we noticed a "for sale" sign in her yard. No announcement, no party, no goodbye. She simply left. Moved 2 towns over, according to one neighbor. Bought a smaller house with no HOA. Vanessa didn't celebrate. She didn't even mention it. She just returned to her training sessions, her seminars, her quiet mornings with coffee on the porch. A month later, we attended a police charity event held at a local range. Officers from all over the state were there, many of whom Vanessa had trained. They set up a friendly skills contest. Vanessa, urged on by her team, joined in. She stepped up to the line, calmly raised her sidearm, and hit the bullseye dead center 5 times in a row. Applause erupted. Then someone shouted, "Hey Vanessa, any Karen sightings today?" Laughter echoed through the range. Vanessa just smiled and said, "Retired herself." As we turned to leave, we noticed a kid wearing a t-shirt that read, "Trained by Vanessa. Arrested by Karen." We couldn't help but laugh. It had all started with a woman who thought she understood power. But Karen never realized that true strength doesn't come from yelling louder or wearing fake vests. It comes from discipline, patience, and the ability to fight without ever needing to raise your voice. Vanessa had never needed to prove anything. She just stood her ground, calm and unshaken, until everyone else saw the truth for themselves. And in the end, that's what won. Not force. Not anger. But clarity.